Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Department of Dreams Festival. We had an absolutely epic day 1, so thank you all of you who joined us, and hopefully you're going to have a great morning as we get into day 2. So just a few things before I announce our really wonderful speakers who are joining us all the way from New Zealand this morning for us, but quite late in the evening for them. On the right of your screen, you'll be able to see there's a toggle of an event and a stage chat. If you're here for the first time, head up into the event page and find your way around and get some advice on what sessions to go to today. But if you're in the session this morning with Angie, Penny and myself, put your questions in the stage. Now, we've only got an hour. Straight after the hour with Penny and Angie, we've got Anna Jane. So I want to really make sure that we make the most of this time. I'm just going to introduce Penny and Angie, tell you a little bit about the session before I hand over for them to take over and wow you with their work. So the title of the session is Fear, Courage and Resilience, Our Role in the Local Ecology. The work that Angie and Penny do is based on a place-based innovation team in New Zealand that works in with and between communities, local government and central government, and alongside a range of different local partners. Their work is about helping to build, disrupt, shift the systems conditions to better allow local and indigenous leadership and culturally grounded responses and ways of working to flourish. It includes understanding how we indigenize spaces and processes and how they enable community-led innovation. I'm really excited to hear from Penny and Angie, as I heard from them a few weeks ago, and I was just mind blown with so much of the depth, love, care, wisdom, historical knowledge that's sat within the work. So I'm really excited that this is the first talk of the second day. You'll be able to see lots of things going on in this event chat, and you'll be able to talk to our team and share your questions. Please make sure you share your questions early because we've only got an hour. So now I'm going to hand over to Penny and Angie. I'm going to go off screen for a little while, and I'll see you back later for a conversation and some questions. Thanks, Penny. Thanks, Angie.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tuatahi he mihi mahana ki a tātou katoa, mai te rohi o te aroa waka. He mihi aroha, he mihi mahana ki a koutou, ngā iwi whānui o te motu, whānui o te whenua, whānui o te ao, nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings from Aotearoa New Zealand, from Te Arawa Waka, Rotorua is where I am at the moment, and just warm greetings to those that have joined us. And I'm Angie Tangaere. I'm Ngāti Porou. My tribe hails from the east coast of the North Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm born and bred in South Auckland, and raising my 2 wonderful boys with my husband in South Auckland, and I've been privileged to work alongside Penny Hagen and my team members in the Southern Initiative, which is a social innovation unit of a local authority, Auckland Council, where I reside. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi no Tamaki Makaurau ahau ko Penny Hagen tako ingoa. Greetings, everybody. I'm Penny, based in Tamaki in Auckland, and working at the Co-Design Lab and the Southern Initiative, and just want to, like Angie, say it's awesome to be able to join you guys from wherever you are and where we are, just feeling really privileged to be part of the dialogue. Saw some amazing things coming out of yesterday, and just acknowledging that there's a huge amount of powerful conversation happening in all parts of the world, and it feels like a real privilege to be able to connect into some pieces of that, and just wanting to acknowledge the coordination and effort and love that's gone into pulling this together. Angie and I are going to share a little bit about just kind of what we're doing. We're going to start with a little bit of just a context setting, really, of where our work is, and some of the things that are, I guess, in top of mind for us. We're going to talk a little bit about the perspective of what we've observed over the last 3 months here in Aotearoa New Zealand and what that's meaning for some of our work and thinking forward. So I'm going to do a bit of that kind of background, scene setting and locating, and Angie's going to talk to some of the, I guess, the stuff that's happening today, yesterday and tomorrow, because I guess we're processing this very much as we go, and we're really interested in just having a conversation with people about what we're doing and what you guys are also seeing and feeling. And so this is just shared in the spirit of us still figuring out how we talk about what we're doing and how we feel about that right now. So I'm going to jump to the screen share, and hopefully we can balance all the tech well. Let me fiddle. Okay, oops, start at the beginning. So we just have shared a little bit about where we come from, but I'll talk a little bit more in a technical sense. Our work locates us in between Auckland Council, which is a local council, local government authority, and multiple central government agencies. And obviously there's many communities surrounding us, but technically speaking, we sit in a really interesting place, embedded inside local government and also partly central government. So that in-betweenness of our work is something that we're navigating all the time. So our feet is on the ground in South Auckland. We're hosted inside council, but we work also on behalf of central government agencies supporting social and economic and cultural innovation. So our feet are very much grounded in Tāmaki Here Ki Te Tonga, which is the Southern Initiative, South Auckland. Our remit is place-based innovation, so supporting communities really to achieve their aspirations, but also really conscious of the policy and systems conditions that enable them to do that. So we have a feel like we sit on multiple levels and multiple spaces, but very much grounded in place. So our work starts with people in place and the power of place, and that speaks both to the history of place and also the potential of place for healing and belonging. And so the area that we work in, and most of our team comes from the place that we're based in, has really deep cultural history. We have a strong connection to multiple iwi or tribes. So there's many different mana whenua that connect into the area that we work in. We're also deeply connected to being part of the Pacific, but also the space that we operate on is land that was unlawfully confiscated by the government. So the entire space that we now operate on as a local government entity has a really deep and in some cases very traumatic history. And so that sits, but also alongside the absolute depth of creativity and innovation that's really profound within it. So we kind of feel the responsibility and the tension and the potential of that all the time. I just want to talk briefly about, I guess, the things that are principles that sit under our work, and Angie will talk more deeply to these when she gives examples. But we talk about, I guess when we're being technical, we talk about practice-based evidence. What does it mean to build knowledge about what works for change by working with people, but drawing on the best of Western science and Western knowledge, but also privileging Mātauranga or indigenous knowledge systems. So for us specifically, Mātauranga talks to the knowledge of Te Ao Māori, the world of the Māori world, and bringing that together with a learning and action methodology. So working with families and drawing on these different knowledge bases as we create new ways of understanding how we want to be. So these principles sit under our work. Sorry. So what I'm going to shift to now is just talk a little bit about the things that we observed over the last 3 months, which I guess they don't change how we see things, but they've made certain things more acute and more profound and more particular. and more significant. And I know that some of these things will be similar experiences to others, and also maybe different too. Of course, in New Zealand, we have a distinctly different experience than some others, and I acknowledge that our space is quite a different space, and although we are still profoundly in a acknowledgement of the health implications of what's happened with COVID, we're also in a space where we're in the reality of the economic and the shift as well. So I know we're in a slightly different pace than some others, but I just want to talk to what we saw over the 3 months that we were in lockdown here. In addition to people being, of course, scared, uncertain, under enormous amounts of stress and pressure, needing a lot of additional support, concern and confusion, we also saw amazing examples of collective action in place, of networks activated, of communities helping each other out, of people just stepping straight into a leadership space or taking on leadership in new ways, sharing resources, this kind of lateral community and government power sharing that was a real demonstration of care and kindness and partnership and power sharing. And that was also, we can think about that in cultural terms. It was manaakitanga in action. So manaakitanga being a te ao Māori principle or concept or value that talks about kindness and generosity. So it's a fundamental way of being, and that's what we saw in action across our communities and our neighbourhoods. People didn't need to wait to be paid or told what to do. There was just this instinctive activation of manaakitanga and care and looking after each other. And there was also examples of indigenous leadership and partnership that we're always trying to prioritise, but through the crisis process was able to really come forward and really show itself, partly because a whole lot of traditional power and decision making just stepped out of the way or was too slow to react, actually, in some cases. And so the leadership of different communities, iwi, marae, came forward and things just were done, and they were done in culturally grounded ways. And so some examples of that was very early discussions, pre any policy shifts here about what was happening around how to manage tangihanga or funerals, which have an enormous amount of protocol around them. They're deeply, deeply culturally significant, but there was really live proactive work within different Māori communities about how that would be managed, and there didn't need to be government policies to dictate how that would be done safely. There was a live cultural evolution of policy to respond. So we saw through those 6 weeks many examples, living examples of what is the alternative system that we're trying to support. And so this sort of gave us this tacit demonstration really quickly of a whole bunch of things that we'd been told weren't possible or were too difficult or had previously had barriers in front of them. And I know this will be in some cases, others have had similar experiences. And now as we shift into, so how do we hold on to that? What comes next? We're not in the same mode as we were. We're in a more of a recovery and obviously a maintaining the stability that we've created mode. Some other things are surfacing, and I'm going to hand over to Angie to talk about what she's seeing and what's being surfaced and what this means for some of our thinking and working.
Kia ora, Penny. Just before I get into the kōrero or the discussion, I just want to acknowledge the expertise of those that have joined us and around the world in terms of the focus and effort around the world to support our communities and our people, our families to be well. And I just want to offer this as a sharing in humility in our context, as Penny says. So we're in a particular context here in Aotearoa, almost emerging from the health crisis into what recovery looks like moving forward, and feel fortunate for us to be in that state as a nation. If I could just mention, as Penny was describing what we observed in terms of the activation of cultural leadership and culturally centred action at a community level, which meant that there was a caring, a manakitanga, which is a caring and nurturing of others, and a whakamana of others, which is to recognise the power and essence of each other as a being and value that, and aroha in terms of having a deep affection for others and caring for others as though they are family. But as we observe the activation of that culturally led practice, that culturally led leadership in our community, I also want to emphasise what we have seen in terms of systems response is an unprecedented unlocking of resource and support due to due to flexibility around what was pre-existing criteria process to access service and support here in Aotearoa. And I guess what we want to talk to you about tonight is how we're observing both of those phenomena in terms of the community and culturally led activation and the systems innovation, and how we continue to support and enable those actions, behaviours, responses as we move into an era of living with COVID-19. So I just want to talk about some things that we're observing, particularly now in the context that we have, which is we're very fortunate. We've been in a period of time where we did not have any cases. We've had a couple of cases in recent days, but we were really feeling like we were getting ahead of the health crisis, and we were starting to look into what do we need to learn from the crisis period to enable social innovation and better outcomes for those who are experiencing the most disadvantage in our community. And what we've been observing is that there's certainly been a shift in power and response across systems, and the pressure in terms of economic implication for our communities in our countries meant that there's a whole heap of anxiety and fear about what lies ahead for us as families, as communities, as businesses, as an economy. And that fear is generating some behaviour and some responses that generates further fear for our communities and families. And we acknowledge that, and we acknowledge the pressure that this worldwide crisis is creating. And what we've been thinking about is, as the power shifts, how do we acknowledge that fear and anxiety that's being generated, acknowledge that, but also, and respond to that, but also support what needs to, the courage that we need to have in the face of that fear. And we can see that manifesting across different levels and different parts of our system, whether that's the fear of major institutions and agencies in terms of their own survivability in the current climate, and what that means as they respond to families and their existence, and also businesses in terms of restructure, redundancy, etc., and those who are most likely to be affected by these kind of economic shocks, feeling the fallout in terms of redundancies, unemployment. And what the third thing is how, once we've acknowledged the anxiety and fear, how do we get alongside our communities, our businesses, the system, and support ongoing conversations that support each of those components of our society to be courageous and face those challenges with resilience and learn from those challenges so we continue to be resilient in the recovery, because the consequence could be fear, creating more fear, breeding more fear, creating more unintended and negative consequences for our community. So our job as a social innovation unit has to be to think about, well, how do we get alongside people, support, be courageous in the face of some very daunting circumstances, and support our systems to be courageous, but also to think about how we're learning about what needs to be folded into the next phase, the next era for resilience and recovery. What's our next one? What's the next one say? And so what does that mean for us? If we're thinking about, we're acknowledging the fear, we're acknowledging we need to be courageous and we need to be resilient and we need to learn quickly. Some things that we've been thinking about or observing in this space has been, we need to lean into the difficult challenges, be courageous, but also we need to be able to demonstrate very quickly what the new norm might look like. And that's because some of the anxiety and fear is there's an acknowledgement generally that we need to move into a new norm, but some of our people, some of our systems, some of our structures can't visualize what the new norm looks like. So apart from leaning into the acknowledging fear, being courageous in terms of thinking about what we need to do in the future, the other thing is for us to quickly understand what might we demonstrate as an alternative or as a compelling response, alternative compelling response to traditional services, programs, or systems responses. And there's some things that we've been noticing around how that might happen in our work. And one has been, how might we indigenize spaces, processes, protocols to enable an innovative approach to supporting families and communities and enabling community and family-led innovation. And that is really activating the cultural indigenous wisdoms that I was just touching on. So we have a tikanga-led framework which helps us to think about what are the cultural components or cultural wisdoms that we might use to think about how we might work differently, but also how we interact differently with communities and with system, and to create a local ecology of support for our communities. So I've talked about manaakitanga, aroha and mana as being core components about the way we think and act and behave, but we also talk about whanaungatanga and whakawhanaungatanga as being a core component, because we're recognising connections, genuine connections to each other, genuine supportive connections to each other and to place is central to being able to create a local ecology of support for our communities in place. I can touch on a particular example of that, and perhaps I'll go to that and then I can touch on those other components as well. And so we've been doing some work at a local level in our community where we have been working inside the systems crisis response, recognising the drivers of system to be seen to be responding in crisis and lockdown, and at the same time supporting an ability to create alternatives to the systems response through alternative culturally grounded responses. So an example of that might be supporting a culturally centred and culturally led healing process for families as opposed to a triage process that meets existing risk and need. Not to say that doesn't need to happen, but to say the innovation for us in leading in a culturally centred approach is that we're not just seeking to meet the immediate risk and need, but we're also seeking to heal spirit, mind, body, and historical trauma. So the ongoing trauma of colonization that is intergenerational for us as a people. So creating spaces where the system needs to respond in a certain way, and we're also creating a compelling alternative to sit alongside that response, which is culturally led and is grounded in indigenous knowledge. Part of that also is to figure out the power structure that sits in system, and how do we share that power across the ecology that sits for our community. So perhaps thinking about, rather than just agency-led responses, how can we have community-led responses? How can we have family-led responses? And how do we enable that by sharing power, control, but also resourcing? And how do we do that to demonstrate that is possibly the new norm? So that's kind of the decentralizing power and sharing, decentralizing service responsiveness across systems that can include non-traditional service provider responses and power. And then the other thing that we've been doing is thinking about so we're working with inside of system and indigenising space inside a systems response, creating compelling alternatives inside a system. And then the other thing we've been thinking about is how do we sit alongside system and support truly community and family-led innovation. So starting with the lived experience of those that are living in our community, and empowering and enabling those communities, those families, to design and test their own local fit-for-purpose solutions for some of our most complex problems. So we're creating a space where we're supporting inside of system for innovation, but also supporting alongside it as well. We'll just check if I think we go to the next one. Yeah. So what does that mean in practice for us? It means that when you're demonstrating a new norm, when you're creating an innovation, when you're challenging the status quo, when you're challenging traditional systems response, there's a whole heap of risk that comes with that. And so part of our role is understanding how we shoulder some of that risk to empower others, to enable others to take risk or to try something differently that they may have not done so in the past. So what we know pre-COVID was that in our community in South Auckland, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same result, and those are undesirable results for us. Our communities are experiencing disadvantage and inequity. So how do we take the learning from lockdown, understand what we might want to be trying in terms of a new norm, and then how do we shoulder the risk? And some of that is for us to get alongside our innovation partners and to be explicit that if we are trying these new things, that we are shouldering the risk for that, and we will take responsibility basically for that innovation and for the risk, and ultimately whether that succeeds or that fails, to enable others to feel they can act, to enable others to feel they have the permission and the ability to try new things. To champion the truth that for a long time we've been told certain things could or could not happen inside a system, and could or could not happen in terms of resourcing. And what we have observed during lockdown is that they can happen. And so how do we reflect that back to the system, and then continue to support the enabling of the types of behaviours and processes and leadership that has allowed those things to happen during lockdown that we were told could never happen or were too difficult to manage or too complex. And now that we know that's possible, how do we share the learning about what actually enabled that? So we've been thinking about disruption and discretion. has it been the disruption of COVID-19, or has it been that there has been discretion inside of some of our systems that just wasn't activated? And we need to lean into what has really enabled the unlocking of resource and support during COVID, and to be able to share that with our systems and our leadership so that it can continue to be enabled. It's true to say for some of our families in South Auckland, during the lockdown, they've told us that they have felt supported, that they haven't had as much support and resource as when they did in lockdown. So for some of our families, they've had a positive experience of resource and support during lockdown, and we really want to learn and to figure out how we enable that continuing, so that families do feel supported. It's an abundance mindset. It's thinking about how we open up criteria and be generous in the way that we support families and communities, rather than risk mitigating and resource scarce. And then the third thing we just wanted to touch on, and we've got some questions, but I don't want to take too long. I think we need to have a conversation, is to think about now. We've been thinking about systems change, and what we're thinking about now is at a local level, what is the ecology of support that needs to be grown, enabled, catalysed at a community level? So going on beyond systems response, service response, agency response, when we think about what we've seen in terms of cultural leadership, social capital, and community-led responses for our community, then we know that traditional social service and agency responses is only one part of a system of ecology that needs to exist to support our families for equitable outcomes. And so how do we grow that systems response and innovate that right now with what we know? And how do we also catalyse what we know to be true in terms of cultural leadership, in terms of community leadership, in terms of the strengths of our communities and our families? And what's the essence and life force of such an ecology at a local level? And how do we acknowledge that and support that in place? And Penny's talked about, we have some a history of colonisation in our country, and we have a certain energy imprints in our places in terms of how that's affected the life force of places, and actually the life force of people who are living there, who continue to live with the trauma of that. And so our thinking now is around how do we acknowledge all of that in place and grow a system of support that has a systems response, but also catalyses cultural wisdoms, community leadership, community strengths, and family strengths and leadership. That's probably enough, isn't it, Penny? We're going to go to our questions.
So let's wait a moment before we go into questions. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you. I'm not sure whether when you're in the thick of the work that you're doing every day and you embody this work in such incredible ways, and every time I've heard you talk, you know, this is your work, this is your life, these are your communities. I'm not sure if you maybe will know from a perspective of from myself and the UK and, you know, our political and cultural context, how profound what you've shared is. And so I just want to acknowledge that for a moment, to say that the sort of clarity of message and work that you're doing is it just, I could feel my heart like going, just exploding, because there is just an ease of confidence about the things that matter that come from your work. And Angie, every time I've also heard you talk, it's just mind-blowing. So I want to say that for the next 20-ish minutes, you know, the more you can talk, the more you can share. I'm very, very happy for you to keep sharing that wisdom, because it's game-changing for us here. And I just want to, you know, there's so many things that I was completely inspired by every time I've heard you talk. The core principles that you talked about from indigenous wisdom, the things that you've leaned in on and made sure that you center in your work, acknowledging breaking that cycle of fear and what that can do to communities, demonstrating alternatives, really making sure that you are shouldering some of the risk and supporting communities in the best way possible. But also, Angie, I loved what you said about reflecting and championing the truth around, things that people previously had said were impossible, now all became possible, either because resource was unlocked because it had to be, that was previously, taken, held away from communities, or because in some cases the public sector was just too slow to be able to react, and how important that is. And again, most importantly for me was the acknowledgement and centering the fact that healing of the long-term trauma that exists and the impact that has on communities. And there's so many similarities and examples we could compare to where we just aren't centering that kind of care, that kind of healing in our communities as well. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing as much as you did, because I know it's a huge part of you that maybe how profound it is to us and to me, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. But before, we've got a couple of questions already coming in, which is lovely. But I'm also going to indulge a little bit and ask you some questions, because I'm just curious, right? So we're in the Department of Dreams, and we hear a lot in the media over here, in the Western media, about New Zealand, and what we get presented is that New Zealand had like a dream response with a dream prime minister, and you're already in recovery and maintenance, and it's a beacon that we should all be looking to, but absolutely we don't as well, right? So we know that all this example and all this leadership and all this incredible knowledge exists over in New Zealand, and your responses and what's happened. We kind of glamorize it, and but we don't know how to kind of really embed and learn from the wisdom that is there. Can you just speak to that? What's it really like in New Zealand? Is it as great as it looks in terms of your response? How has the country responded compared to the rest of the world? And what do you think are some of the kind of highlights of that? And or is it just kind of a beautiful media story?
Do you want to talk to that, Ange?
I'd love to hear what you've got to say about that, Penny.
It's a personal perspective, obviously.
Yes.
There's a few realities. There's no question that we feel extremely lucky and grateful that there's a couple of things. I think we did. There's no question that there was very, very strong and clear leadership from central government, a health response and an evidence-based health response that's been, at least from my perspective, largely consistent and largely transparent. There are people that have had different experiences of it, so I'm speaking just from, I guess, what I speak just personally, I guess. We've tried to keep as much in touch with people as we can across our networks to understand what their experiences are, and of course people have felt frustration, certain things haven't arrived when they should have arrived and all that stuff. At a high level there was consistency, and there was fairly decisiveness and transparency. Okay, today we're going to have to change because of these reasons. There was iterations of things, and that felt good in the sense that, okay, well, maybe we got that wrong, next week we're going to try something different. We also had lead time, so we had a lot of lead time, and we had a lot of we had an opportunity that some other countries didn't have, in terms of it got to us last. So we had several weeks of a lot of people across the country, particularly health professionals, speaking with other experts across the world and tapping directly into their practice experience. So, you know, how, I think it was in all industries, but especially in our health industries, they were in policing in a really unusual way. I mean, we're always looking internationally, but every person I've spoken to from across our agencies talked about using international intel and really tapping into what was happening on the ground. And that came down to some really, yes, high-level policy decision-making, but also some practice on the ground and what was implemented. So I feel like there's a balance of strong leadership, and we also had the benefit of some real pain that others went through first, right? So that's a two-way thing. Of course, there's also a counter-narrative that's being spun about the impacts of us locking down and closing down the economy effectively, which I just don't buy into. It wasn't like we had a choice. So yeah, I mean, we felt pretty lucky on the weekend when we went out and basically effectively could act like it wasn't there, and then we've had an awakening to the reality that that's not the case, right? Like we're going to be living with this and stuff. So I think we've had a little, but that's my perspective on your question, Amy. Kia ora. So we feel lucky, and we learnt from everybody who's shared and is continuing to share.
I just might add, if I can, to that for my people, we know what the effects of a pandemic can be. We were almost decimated by the last one that came to Aotearoa in the early 1900s. So I feel very, very grateful because the reality is, for our Indigenous people here, we are overrepresented in as I'm sure it is across the world, and for other ethnic minorities in terms of poor housing, poor healthcare. And so for this kind of thing would be really bad news for us if it spread like wildfire through our communities, and it would spread quickly. And so I feel grateful that we are not in the same position as we were when we had that first pandemic. And if I just might say, and I will say also, this is a personal perspective. It does not reflect my employer in any way. Now I've said that, is that, for me, I understand the economic implications, but I feel strongly that we need to put our people first, and then we can recover. And so I think that that's important. And yes, we've made some mistakes for sure, but we went early. And it took, the whole of our country to get us where we are by behaving in a way that really shows manaakitanga for each other, trying to keep everybody else well. The values of certain people and parts of our society emerge very quickly, is what I will say. And there are those that valued going back quickly into an economy, and those that say we just need to be caring for our people. But for my people, one of our biggest fears was what would happen during the lockdown if one of our family passed away. That was the biggest fear. It wasn't necessary for some of us, not all of us, but the biggest disruption was, the inability to express ourselves culturally for our deceased, and for our living in that process, and that I think that cultural perspective is important, because that's the things that we were valuing as being really important. And of course now, as Penny says, we need to look to economic recovery, and I absolutely agree that that's right. But I do feel grateful, and I feel aroha for the rest of the world who are still going through massively challenging circumstances.
Thank you so much, Angie and Penny. I think that there's no doubt to me that the humility that exudes from your leadership, and in the way that you so seamlessly talk about local government national government and your communities, and this idea that the whole country came together. And you know, there's no doubt to me that it's not a perfect story. It never is, but you know, there's something so important about what you're sharing, and I just feel privileged to be able to listen to this. I'm just going to take a few questions from the audience, and then we'll start to wrap up because we're already in the last 15 minutes. So Hannah says, for her, the distance between local places and central government in the UK feels significant. Those in places of authority are really removed from the places they create policies for. I'm wondering how the relationship between communities, local government and central government feels for you in sorry, I'm very bad at pronouncing, but so I'll leave you to say that again. Specifically, levels of trust, openness, learning and collaboration. Yeah, so who would like to speak to that first?
Shall I have a go, Penny?
Yeah, sure. I'm just I'm rereading it, so you go and I'll jump in.
Okay, I better have a quick read. I mean, the challenge for us as an innovation unit is that we're holding all of those levels simultaneously, and that's exhausting and frightening and challenging. But that it's built into our practice. The systems thinking and locally led or an enabled innovation is our practice. So I like to focus on supporting our communities to lead their own design and testing of their local fit for purpose solutions. So while we're acknowledging the influence, the power of those structures of local government, central government, we're also valuing the talent, expertise, creativity, leadership and power, autonomy of our own community. So part of my job is to figure out how do we just enable and catalyse that to happen? How do I get behind our community, get behind our families to do that almost regardless of what's happening with the other stuff, and understand this is what's happening here, and then these other stuff is that's happening, and also, so how do we catalyse that and power that forward to lift the constraints of the other things, and then feed the learning over into system, but also observe what's happening in system to support locally led innovation at the same time. I guess it's to say it's a movement, really. That's, I would say, a local, supporting local movement for better outcomes that's led by community and led by families. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess to talk to the, we've got feedback. That structural thing, obviously our scale is to our advantage also, I think, in terms of the levels of complexity of government. So compared to, say, even Australia with the state system, where there's three levels there, we have our local government and central government. So to some extent, it's simpler and closer in comparison and relative to other jurisdictions. But we certainly still have even though Wellington's not that far away from Auckland, distance-wise, we definitely feel the same kind of orbit issues that others feel in terms of, Canberra, Wellington, these sort of where the central functions of government operate in large groups of policymakers reside. There's absolutely still a proximity issue that we experience all the time between the decision-making locale and the places in which that is activated and experienced by people. So that's absolutely consistent for us. And we also definitely have tension, although I think there's examples where it's much worse, I suppose. But it's not, we haven't resolved the tension that sometimes exists between whose job is this? Is this a central government job? Is this a local government job? As opposed to, so that definitely does play out. We see that tension play out as opposed to, whereas, and there are other times when I think that works really well, the relationship and understanding, but we definitely feel those tensions between people might walk away from a problem because they're like, oh, well, that really should be a local government issue, or no, that belongs to central government, whereas as a citizen or a resident or a community member, who cares? It's like, sort out this stuff, so those things are still real, even though we don't have the same complexities and scales, I guess. And I feel like that's part of our job, is to figure out and help, and facilitate. There's lots of people working towards trying to make that fluidity and that proximity. So, yeah, that's a real challenge still for us.
I just want to add really quickly that the stuff that we're talking about in terms of local ecology of support and decentralising power, that's what we're talking about, is that how we've got an opportunity to figure some of the stuff out in community now, and that is, how do you decentralise power and redistribute it? So it doesn't just come away from the core of it, but it comes down into community and then is distributed out into a network of shared leadership. Sounds great, doesn't it? If anyone's got any more ideas about that, we'd love to hear about it. But that's the theory. How are we decentralising the power and then sharing it?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it does sound great, and I guess for me, when I think, when I think about the last 3 to 6 months of what's happened, actually, and I've been really lucky to be in a lot of conversations. I had the privilege to have a bit of that freer time, as I don't have as many care responsibilities, so I've got to read and learn. And I have to say that the place that gives me the greatest hope that what you've just talked about, Angie, is possible, is the work that you're doing. And I don't say that lightly, and that's why I feel like I'm just trying to let you guys talk and share as much as you possibly can. And believe it or not, we're already coming up to the time that's wrapping up, and so there's so many questions about like barriers to the shift from whole community care and well-being, from going from a health crisis to this whole community care. Chris has talked about, there's lots of talk about futures and foresight in the community, that there is no new normal. What do you think of this idea? How do you think the community would address it? So there's lots of questions about barriers and challenges, and I really welcome if any point in the next few days you want to jump into the chat and chat to anyone, please do. But because we're in the Department of Dreams, and because for me, undoubtedly, and I don't say this lightly, you are a beacon of light in your response. You are, as a country, as a group of people, as a piece of work, as a community. I often go back to the times I've heard you talk, and again, I've taken loads of notes today about, what would Angie and Penny be saying right now? And Angie, when you talked about, just focusing on the family level cultural response and supporting that first, and then going up through the layers of all the collaboration and stuff that needs to happen. It sounds so simple, but it's so incredible to just be reminded of that. So because we're in the Department of Dreams, I kind of want to give you guys the last 6 minutes or so, maybe a few minutes each. Can you tell us about, so you talk a lot about the really beautiful, culturally sensitive responses at a family level, at a community level, that you've started to see, that you've been supporting and you've been nurturing, and you've been trying to show some of the new normal in practice and help support that. Could you both share what you've seen that has inspired you or given you most hope about what's coming next? What's an example in your work, or something that you've seen, or even just a dream that you want to pursue more in this? What has these last three or 4 months taught you? And I think really I'd love to hear from a kind of being embedded in your community, in your neighbourhood, in your place, because we'll endlessly work on trying to collaborate with government and all of the big picture responses, but I feel like the mood right now is really about hearing, what is that's happening at a local level that has given you most hope for a new normal that reflects some of our future dreams and hopes. So yeah, I'm just going to hand over the stage to whoever would like to go first, and then we'll wrap up close to 11 o'clock.
Sure. I'll talk fast and give you the last word. Is that all right, Ange?
Okay.
So I guess I'll just firstly thank you so much for the opportunity to just be connected to you and to everyone that's on the stream. Just I guess the two quick things that I would say is, firstly, someone reflected back to me when we were sort of having one of these "What are we seeing?" session, that there were families who had really felt disempowered in their lives, who stepped into leadership roles and now know that they can do it. And actually, this is the courageous and the resilience that Angie was talking about. Like, they're not going to go back now and go, oh yeah, sure, I'll just, so that they were able to see themselves as leaders through this. And that's and now we can continue to try and do our best to support that, but that realization and that opportunity. And then just there's appetite. Yes, there's people quickly snapping back for sure, but there's appetite for collective action that didn't exist before. There is absolutely stuff that's come down around people's and institutions where they went, oh, actually, it really worked well, didn't it, when we formed that amazing collective, smashed out all that stuff over 3 weeks with schools, with maraes, with families, with networks, businesses. And they got a feel for what not having the shutters up feels like, and for actually putting hands out, like literally. And so that willingness is there. So that's, I feel total heart about that, Ange.
Yeah, I think that all of what Penny said, and that what we knew to be true emerged, which is our communities are incredibly resilient. For lots of our people, being in lockdown and not being able to go places and do things or have the resources that you might usually access, that's an everyday occurrence for some of these families. So actually, for those that are experiencing the most inequity, they managed the lockdown better than expected, some of them. And so, yeah, just to say that our community is incredibly resilient and talented, and that they most definitely have a bigger part to play in how we recover as a country and how we respond and support better outcomes for our families and communities that are experiencing the most inequity. And that I just feel incredibly hopeful that that we've seen an unprecedented response from agencies and system, and we must capitalise on that. We must utilise that, maximise that now. We know it's possible. So how do we quickly learn from that and support systems and agencies to continue to behave in that way? And also, restoration and humanity. People were reaching out on social media, to other people in their community, to other communities, and that's how we should be behaving as human beings, caring for each other, loving for each other. And our Prime Minister said that Aroha is the answer. That is love. She said that she's managed 2 massive crises for our country. And she talked about love being the way, caring for, loving people, looking after people, nurturing people. And that's at the heart of what I think our leadership that in this era needs to hold tight to, is how do we care and love each other, and then the rest should follow.
Wow. Thank you so much. I've got goosebumps, but even though I've heard you so many times, I want to say a huge thank you for your time, for sharing, for the love and humility and honesty, and sharing quite some difficult things as well through this talk. I feel genuinely, I feel hopeful because Penny and Angie and New Zealand and your Prime Minister, and there are examples in the world. This isn't a dream that we can't see. This isn't a dream that we can't understand or don't know where it's going to come from. the way that you're honest about the challenges, but also just the fact that there's so many beautiful examples. There's examples of collaboration and centering love and care and indigenous wisdom and culturally sensitive responses, and being able to do that in practice. I just want to say I'm really grateful for you both, for your sharing, for your humility, for your leadership, and your willingness to continue to share and try and inspire the rest of us to get our act together, because we're certainly not over here. And also, even though it's completely not my fault, I feel like we should apologise on behalf of the UK for your latest 2 coronavirus cases coming from here, which is just, there's something about colonisation and us bringing it back to you that is absolutely just horrendous, the irony of that. So I want to just wrap up, say thank you. If anybody would like to talk to Angie or Penny and relay a message, please put it in the chat as we get ready to go over to the next talk. I'm going to unmute you both so you can say a little bye. And yeah, thank you so much, Penny and Angie. And please go on with that courage and resilience that you show and inspire in all of us.
Kia ora, thank you so much.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for having us.